Welcome to another episode of Bible Conversations. Today we have two guests on. We're going to be talking about Griefshare and caregiving. All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today we have two of my most favorite people in the world, Dave Roberts and Kathleen Whitson. Dr. Kathleen Whitson has been on with us before, and you might recall that conversation, but Dave Roberts has not. And so I'll let them talk a little bit about themselves. Otherwise, the whole episode will be me talking about them. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Ladies first.
Well, I was on here discussing the women's role within the church and all the things that they could do, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that because I'm a woman and because I've been in the church for a very long time. Today I will be talking about caregiving and caregiving support specifically.
And hello, I'm Dave Roberts. I'm a member of the Keller Church of Christ. I've served as an elder here for a number of years. Recently, about 10 years ago, retired from work. And now I am the coordinator of Griefshare for the church and also a marriage and family therapy counselor. So looking forward to our discussion today on grief and Griefshare.
Yeah, retired is, that's a false term for Dave. And for Kathleen, to be fair. Well, I have seen you guys interact with lots of different people. Most weeks, either myself or Dylan will go and we'll set up Griefshare and we'll get the tables arrayed in the right way. And I remember I was maybe a year in, not even, to ministry when y'all kicked Griefshare back up because we had started during COVID. And I think, Dave, you had maybe asked the office to do it. And then,
yes.
So we went in and we set it up. And then I went in. And Kathleen, you were in there. Mm-hmm. And you were kind of looking at the tables and you said, "This isn't right." and my first response, reaction to really knowing you, because we'd known each other, we had met, but we hadn't really talked, and we didn't know each other. And so that was one of the first real interactions I remember, and I was like, "Oh, she's terrifying. I need to be on her good side. I need to." And as I've gotten to know you, I don't find that to be even remotely true.
You've just learned to accept my directness.
Well, you're direct, but you do it in a loving way, and it's in a very purposeful way. You're not direct for the purpose of being direct to hurt people's feelings. You're direct because there's a reason you need to be direct. And so anyway, I've really grown just to love you, and I really love the way that you care for my wife.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, you married well.
I married up, is what I did. And so anyway, as I said, I could go on and on about both of you guys. I think we'll start with Griefshare, and then we'll get into caregiving, if that's all right.
That's fine.
And Dave has been a mentor of mine for about a year now, if not more. And we meet on the weekly, just about, and
yes,
we just chat. We talk, and so... I tell people, I said, one of my best friends is, in his 70s. And people get a kick out of that because...
Who is that?
That's you, brother.
In his 70s? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you want me to tell people 80s, I can do that.
Well, close.
And so, I feel like we get along very well. And it's just... So anyway, regarding Griefshare, you have a heart for helping people who are struggling. In fact, you went to school... after your wife passed away,
yes,
after you retired,
yes,
so that you could freely give your time and resources and knowledge and wisdom to people who are in need of help.
That's correct.
And that is beyond admirable in my eyes. And then on top of just counseling people and being there for people, you also, like you mentioned, you lead Griefshare.
Right.
So why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about what is Griefshare?
Okay, good. Thank you. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It is a passion of mine. Griefshare is an organization. It's run by a group out of the Carolinas. It's a series of videos and workbooks and discussions that deal with the subject of grief. We invite people from the church, from the community, friends and relatives, whomever has experienced the loss of a loved one, to come and spend time with us in 13 weeks, covering the information that is very, very critical to them. Their hearts are broken in many cases, we find because of the loss of a loved one. I know in my experience, my wife died 13 years ago, and it took me quite a while to overcome that, not get over it. You never get over it. As we talk about in Griefshare, grief is a continuous emotion, and it is an emotion. It's a very functioning emotion that God has created for us. He allows us to experience grief only after the death of a loved one. We think sometimes that we're able to grieve before the death. We know what we think it's going to be like, but we always find out, as we talk to the people that come through our class, we always find out that it's a brand new experience for them every time. And equally important, it's very unique. I can talk to you about how I feel and how I've experienced grief, and you can nod your head and say, yes, that sounds reasonable, but when you experience it, it's going to be entirely different, entirely unique for you. A prime example of someone who grieved in the Bible, I'm sure all of you have read the shortest verse, or know the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35. Jesus wept. Jesus wept because a friend of his had died. The family was in grief. Now, he was trying to console them, but he himself had lost a friend. And this is interesting because Jesus also knew at that point in time that Lazarus was going to be resurrected very soon.
What's funny is I actually just turned to
you
that.
did? Okay, good.
Yeah, that's where I was turning.
Oh, okay.
Was that story?
Well, we've been talking a long time, so we know each other.
Yeah.
So that's good.
2 peas in a pod.
So Jesus is an example for us right there. Even though he is the part of the Trinity, he is a human being at that point in time and has the emotions and the grief that we feel. He's grieving also the death of Lazarus. Since it is an emotion, though, it also affects us emotionally, but grief will affect us physically and socially, relationally, and spiritually. So there are some times, when we talk about this in Griefshare, there are some times when people are very angry with God, and they ask the question, why, God? Why did you do this? Why did you take this person? And you realize how many times Job asked that question? Yeah. Job asked that question 16 times of God in the book of Job. And we all know that God never answered him. Yeah. God told him, you think you're smart. You're not even close to what I am. You can't handle what I know. So the question of why comes up. We're not able to express what the answer is because we don't know what it is. And it's God's provision to do that. So it's okay. It's interesting that we think about going through a class, and some people ask us, how can you go through a class if it's unique for every person? Well, there are a lot of commonalities in grief, and Griefshare brings those out. The videos are excellently done, I believe. There are a number of therapists on there, counselors, preachers, ministers, who give their opinion of what God means by grief and how to handle the grief. So I think it's a well-coordinated group they put together. Good. All for me.
Yeah. Well, no, I think all of that is wonderful. Going back to the story of Jesus and Lazarus, you have Jesus and Mary and Martha, right? And at John 4, I believe it's John 4, maybe it's a little earlier, a little later. Either way, you've got Mary and Martha who are very close to Jesus, and they spend time with Jesus. And in fact, Martha, you're busy with much serving. Mary has chosen the better portion, and they're in her house. Jesus is in her house, and they're talking and they're sharing, and then you get to the death of Lazarus, which is their brother, and so they're grieving and they're hurt. And what I've always really found interesting about this section is it is Martha that goes out first, and Martha goes and meets Jesus where he's at, and Martha says in verse 21 says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's what she says.
She was a little angry with him.
She was. Yeah. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus talks, and Jesus even says here, your brother will rise again. He hasn't wept yet. He hasn't gotten to that point.
He has not. No, he has not.
Right?
That's right.
And so then we move forward a little bit, and you get to Mary. Mary goes out, and what does Mary say? Well, Mary gets to him, verse 32. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, y'all got to be crazy. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The exact same thing. Jesus hears the exact same thing twice. And yet, in verse 33, it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. And then verse 35, Jesus wept. And so grief affects everyone individually, but our grief, I think, also affects others around us.
It does.
And there's something to be said about having a support group where you can cry together.
Yes.
And you can share your heartaches, and you can share what's going on, and you can tell everybody it's okay. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry, and it's going to get better.
Yeah, we've had people apologize in Griefshare sessions and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm crying." And then we always say, "This is where you can cry.
Yes.
This is the place. It's okay."
Interesting that when people come to the very first lesson, they walk into the room and their heads are down. They're looking very concerned and even scared, not knowing what it's going to be like. What are they going to ask me? Are they going to embarrass me? Am I going to cry? Am I going to be in a bad shape here? And then we start teaching Griefshare. And by the end of about the third or fourth lesson, they're walking in smiling. They're happy. They're happy to be there. And equally important, they're sharing their stories with everyone else there. They have become a family in essence. By the end of the 13 sessions, they are a very close-knit group. That's good. And one more thing. I believe that Jesus intentionally did not go in time.
Yeah.
He planned that, of course, so we know that, don't we? Yes.
I absolutely believe that. And it's something special that we have this ability to grieve. And, there are, I've heard different things in relation to death, to dying, to grief, and all of this. But the more, and I guess the harder that you grieve, the closer that relationship was, generally speaking.
Yes.
And so what it is to me, at least right now, as someone who has not had the, I guess, opportunity to grieve over a very, very close loved one, is it as a reminder of the memories and the experiences and the love that has been shared between two people. And it's...
Humans are the only mammal that can cry tears. And that is the gift from God.
Yeah. It is. It's often seen as weakness. And as y'all mentioned, right, people apologizing for crying. I don't see crying as a weakness. I see it as a strength.
Oh, it is. Yes.
What's funny is we tell, especially men, right? Women are not necessarily told don't cry unless you're playing softball or baseball, in which case you don't cry in softball or you don't cry in baseball. League of Their Own is a good movie. Anyway, we tell young men, don't cry. Can't cry. You've got to be strong. You've got to be tough. And I don't believe that crying is an indicator of a deficit of strength or toughness at all. I think it's a sign that one has felt deeply. One has had emotions that are incredibly important to an individual's life. And the ability to then cry and to allow those emotions to come out is strength. That is a strong thing to do.
If you hadn't loved, you wouldn't grieve.
Correct. There's a song. I think you guys like country music. And if you don't, you're wrong, and that's okay. There's a song by Gary Allan. The song is called "Tough Little Boys," and one of my favorite songs. And in the beginning of the song, he says, I didn't cry when Old Yeller died, at least not in front of my friends. And at the very end of the song, he has a little girl, and he says, when you grow up to be dads, you turn into big babies again. Just this idea that you love something, and so you care about it, and you can't help but let those emotions out. And so I really find Griefshare to be, I have not been there. And I hope for many years I don't have to be there.
I hope you're not either, yes.
But I find it to be such an incredible tool and such a wonderful thing. And the other side of it that is probably not often talked about is the evangelistic aspect of it.
Yes, we've been able to talk to people about God, about the Bible, about how in our videos, the videos are, of course, talking to the people sitting there. And so that is how they communicate. They also talk to us through the workbook, and the workbook is filled with scriptures. It's Christian-based, filled with scriptures that God is talking to us. And so we reemphasize, Listen to what God has to say here, but then talk back to him.
Yeah.
Pray to him.
Yeah.
Okay. We talk about James 4:8. I talk about draw near unto God and he'll draw near unto you. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. But I interpret that to mean that we draw near to God because God is always near to us.
Absolutely.
He's always there for us and with us. And so I believe in that wholeheartedly. And that's what we try to convey to the people there, that during this time of sadness, bereavement, you're going to mourn and you're going to lament out loud, lament. And lamenting is to God. And they can do that in Griefshare. They can actually go ahead and do that anytime they want to. It's fine with us. But we try to teach them about how to rely on God, because he has not gone away. It's still, the sun is still shining for this, for us.
Absolutely. Well, Kathleen, do you have anything else you wanted to add on to Griefshare?
Oh, I have a whole lot, but I'm not going to take up my time talking about it.
Okay.
No, one of the things that I kept thinking about is how, and Dave started with this point, grief is so multidimensional. It's not just tears.
Yeah.
It's not just feeling sad. It starts taking over your whole life. Yeah. It can have physical outcomes, and you don't sleep, and it changes your relationships. And that's very complex. Some of it's because of the way you have changed, and some of it's because the way people don't see you the same. And so that's why I think that a 13-week series with these multiple approaches, and especially the discussion, is so important, because it's a very complicated process. And even though you may have experienced grief with a grandparent, it's nothing compared to the loss of your mother, your father.
Yeah.
And then if you lose your spouse, there's nothing that compares to that.
Yeah. And then losing a child.
Losing a child, yes. But one of the things that we talk about in Griefshare is there is no ranking of grief. Grief is grief. Yeah. And even though you may feel differently with these different relationships, and the first time I was a participant in Griefshare, my mom had died, and there was a couple in there whose 3-year-old boy had died. And I thought, I can't possibly know how they're feeling. It's got to be 1,000 times worse than what I'm going through. Yeah. Yes, and yet different, because I was my mother's only child. I was her caregiver. So I had other aspects affecting that too.
Yeah, there are. I guess a couple of years ago, I realized, people often say, you ask, how are you doing? I say, I'm good. I'm tired, right? And then what's sometimes the response is somebody saying, I'm tired. Oh, you're tired. Let me tell you about why I'm tired. Well, just because somebody else is more tired than you does not negate that person is also tired.
Yes.
In the same way, just because somebody may be grieving harder or have more of a quote-unquote reason, whatever the issue, their grief does not negate somebody else's grief.
That's right.
Grief is grief, and that is that.
That's it.
And so, I like that y'all don't rank it, because you start ranking it, what are you going to have? Seats at a table? All right, well, if you lost, this person, you're here, and if you lost this person over here, and that doesn't make sense. They lost somebody, period. And so anyway.
And we have a whole section on inappropriate things that are said to you, because people don't know what to say to you. So they often say inappropriate things that just make it worse.
Yes.
But they don't mean to.
Correct. I think most people are well-intentioned in what they say.
Most people are, but what the studies have shown, and this is pointed out in Griefshare, studies have shown that most people have not experienced grief or experienced death. And if you have experienced that, you've lost a loved one, your loved one has died, and your friends want to do anything they can to help you, but they don't know what to do, and they don't know what to say, so they'll say anything. That's when they have the inappropriate things. They don't mean that to be that way, but they do, and it's because they don't know what the experience is like.
Well,
very few people.
What are some things that we can say? If you know somebody, okay,
we love you.
Love you.
We love you. There's a story of a gentleman whose wife had died. He was on the receiving line. People were coming through saying how sorry they were and this, that, and the other, but they were saying inappropriate things as well because they didn't know any better. But one man came up, and he was dressed in overalls and a shirt, and he walked over to the gentleman and put his arm around his shoulder and said, I love you. And later, this gentleman whose wife had died quoted to other people what this man had said and said, that's the only thing I remember of the whole session right there. I love you. And so that's what we can do. So we teach things that people can say.
Yeah.
It's important to not say too much, but to show people that you care, that you're there.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we move on to caregiving, is there anything else that you're wanting to say regarding Griefshare?
I am very. I've been teaching this now for 7 years, and I wasn't sure what it was going to be like when I first started. And my grief was 6 years old then, so I did not have this when I was grieving. I sought counseling, and so I had counselors who helped me. But then when I went through Griefshare, and I went through as a participant myself, and I realized this is helping me. I'm feeling much better now. Yeah. And so we brought that into the church here, and we started doing it as a ministry from the church. And over the period of time, 7 years, I have grown to realize just how valuable it is in helping people. Good. In fact, we're very excited right now. The company, Church Initiative is the company that produces this, has just come out with a whole new series, and we're working on developing that right now. We'll be teaching that starting in August. Good. So looking forward to that, and hoping we have a lot of people come to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And you've been studying quite a bit, huh?
Yeah, a lot.
All right. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I came with his first offering here at the church, which was when my mom died. And I was so helped by it. Now, I was her only child and her caregiver. Puts you in a very different category in some ways. Anyway, I was so touched by it. I thought, I want to be a part of this. I want to help. I want to work in this. Yeah. So I asked, and he said, sure. And I became a facilitator. And it was about 5 years after that John died, my husband. And Dave said to me, you can't be a facilitator this fall. And I said, why? Why can't I be? I want to be a facilitator. I want to be a Griefshare. He said, because you're going to be a participant. Yeah. So he put me back in that category, and he was so right. It was a completely different experience than I had had with going through with my mother's death. And so the man knows what he's doing. He knows what he's saying.
He does. That's why I listen to him quite a bit. Well,
my head is just getting bigger and bigger. This is good.
That's all right. After the podcast, we'll make sure to lower it a little. So, Kathleen, why don't you tell us about caregiving?
All right. It's been probably 15 years at least that I have wanted to have a caregiver support group. Mm-hmm. And I put a proposal together. I brought it to the elders. They said yes. They said fine. I surveyed the congregation and got feedback. Oh, I want to be, I need this, I need this, I need this. What I found is, and David kind of warned me, because he knows everything, and he had warned me, caregivers aren't going to be able to come. Yeah. And they couldn't. Yeah. I had a couple of sessions with just one or two people, and then a session with nobody, and I tried to get people for respite care who would go and we have 3 nurses in our congregation who volunteered, but that takes a whole lot of effort to coordinate too. The bottom line is, why do you need a support group for caregivers? Because, first of all, 29% of the population of the United States are involved in some level of caregiving.
Can you explain what caregiving is?
Caregiving is having a primary role in the well-being of someone and let me just read you some of the categories of the main areas of people. It could be a temporary illness or injury. It could be somebody who has long-term illnesses. It could be a permanent disability and someone just who's growing older.
Okay. And
so they're losing some of their physical abilities because of their age. It could be someone with a terminal illness. And I was also the caregiver for my husband. Then there's dementia. And 10% of the U.S. population has dementia. And there's people just say Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is not the overarching category. Dementia is.
Okay.
Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, is a disease. There's vascular dementia. That means you've had something happen to the brain, a brain bleed or concussion something. Lewy body disease is dementia from Parkinson's.
Okay.
There's frontal temporal dementia that usually is early onset and happens very fast. Alcohol-related dementia. If you think about it, why wouldn't you think somebody who is abusing alcohol might come up with dementia? There's Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. Oh, I already mentioned that. There's Down syndrome. There's HIV-associated dementia.
Interesting.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That is CTE, and that's what fighters and football players get because they get so many blows to the head. There is even childhood dementia. Now, dementia itself is a whole different ballgame in caregiving.
Yeah.
So you've got all of these things that would require someone to be there 24/7.
Yep.
And maybe not 24/7, maybe, but a large portion of that time that needs care. And for that person who's doing that, it is very draining.
I'd imagine.
You're doing a lot of physical things, but you're going through a lot of emotional things, particularly if you have someone with dementia, and particularly if you have someone with a terminal disease. And part of being a caregiver is helping that person physically, emotionally, mentally, and make choices.
Yeah.
It's also being prepared to go with that person and meet with the doctor. And how to interact with the doctor.
So what is your role? Caregiving support is designed to accomplish what with a person who comes to you and says, I'm caregiving, what can I do?
Okay. The concept is there is a great deal of information out there. They need all kinds of information. They don't know the resources that are there. They don't know how to work with a doctor. They don't know, should I put this person in a facility or should I... Is hospice an appropriate next step? Yeah. There's all these resources, but then it's coming up and gathering the resources.
So that's what your program does?
That's what I did.
You did, okay.
I have a tremendous amount of resources. Now, it's gotten a little easier with the internet, but there's articles and magazines and all kinds of organizations. Then when I started looking at caregiver support programs, Corey Collins, our current pulpit preacher, recommended that I do something in a broadcast and put up a website so that people could go and because what I found is I was doing a lot of one-on-one.
Yeah.
I can't be at the meeting, but could I come by your house? Could you come see me? Could you talk to me? So, and I was happy to do that, but my goodness, that's like picking up, one acorn at a time.
But isn't that maybe the way, well, okay, let me give an example. Griefshare, when Griefshare meets, that is a group counseling session. It's a group.
Yes.
So, but sometimes people can't really profit from that. So we do one-on-one counseling.
Yes.
One-on-one counseling for grief with just people like that. And maybe that's a problem they have, or it's just the fact that they don't need to be talking about these things in a group setting, but they need some one-on-one help. So the same thing is true with yours, it sounds like. Is that true?
Well, yes, but they also can benefit from talking to others who are caregivers.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So I'm wondering... And you may have already thought of, you probably have already thought of this, but I'm wondering if maybe there's some sort of a way to connect people online to where, they can either FaceTime or maybe there's a Zoom call or there's some way to interact at, on this day of the week, try to set aside 30 minutes to an hour just to talk and chat. And that way you maybe get to start to know some people. And from there that, support groups, I guess from what I can gather, certainly they meet up and they have that benefit of being together in that hour or 2 hour session. But the support and the true benefit, I think, comes outside of that, where you're able to reach out to those people at any time of any day and say, I need help and I need assistance. Because the support, if it only comes once a week, isn't overly supportive.
You're talking about two different things.
Okay.
I'm talking about providing information and discussion.
Okay.
And you're sort of talking about respite care, someone physically helping.
Okay.
And what I found in my research after talking with Corey is I found there are a lot of Griefshare, of caregiver support. I know Griefshare too close to it. Of caregiver support programs on the internet. And it's someone just talking or just...
Yeah.
So it's got to be... What I have come to realize is it needs to be offered multifaceted. And,
Yeah. Okay.
and then when you need to, you do one-on-one.
So this is a work in progress.
It is absolutely a work in progress. I was never so stunned in my life as to when I finally launched it and it didn't fly.
Yeah.
But it didn't fly, not because the need wasn't there, because those who came were like, oh, thank you for this, thank you for that. Oh, this has been so valuable. This has helped me through such and such. But there's so many decisions they have to make. And there are those, and this is where a professional counselor could come in. There are those who are in family disputes over how to take care of the family member who's needing the care. When my mom was in memory care, you get to know everybody there and you get to know a lot of their family. And someone asked me, said, and so how many brothers and sisters do you have here helping with your mom? And I said, none, I'm it. And they said, oh, lucky
You.
Yes, lucky you. You don't have to interact with any. And the facility will ask you, designate one person. We will talk with one person.
Yeah.
We will not talk with every family member.
Yeah.
So there are just so many things to look at. And hospice especially. Hospice has changed so radically. Used to, hospice meant you got about 3 months maybe.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's as much palliative care as all hospice means is you have a terminal disease and you're not going to treat it.
Yeah. Okay.
And only God knows when that's going to end.
Yeah.
So, and then you need to, the other thing is there are so many hospice programs out there now because it just takes a doctor, a couple of medical people, and they can say, presto changeo, we're a hospice facility now. We're a hospice care group. And so you need to really investigate and talk and find out. Usually your doctor will know, and if your doctor can help recommend. But there's just
so many different ways to go about this.
Yes, and there's estate planning, long-term care, clear communication with doctors. I've mentioned these already. Decision-making about treatments. I've mentioned that already. There's just a lot involved. And then, as I said, the person who has any form of dementia, that's a whole special category.
Yeah. Well, you had, so you mentioned the 10% of the U.S. population, which to me is absurd. That's 35 million people, suffer from
some form of dementia. Mm-hmm. 35 million people in the United States alone
suffer from dementia. And that doesn't include the other 19%, which, you've got 100,000 or 100 million people in the United States that are under some form of long-term care, which is, 1 in 3, right? 1 in 3 people essentially that we come in contact with are involved with some form of long-term care. Well, that's significant.
Yes.
That's not a small number. It's not I don't know anybody that, no. That's a very statistically significant number that very likely impacts people who you don't even know it impacts.
Well, and rather than I don't know anybody, it's that you're not aware of.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's so prominent. And when you look at 29% of the people who are caregivers, that's almost a third of the population.
Yeah.
So
then you've got 2/3
yes,
of the population.
This data vacillates. It changes.
Well, if you've got a third of the population that is...
No, I question that. That sounds like a very high number to me.
Oh, okay.
2/3 of our country is involved with caregiving?
Yeah. It doesn't sound high to me.
Okay. I am not the expert. You are.
Is it because it's there's an awareness that you don't have that of people who are, and they may not be the live-in daily. It may not be that 24/7 caregiving. It can just be you have the primary responsibility of making sure that person's got their medication, that person gets to the doctor, that person, or it may just be if it's an elderly person that they have a food to eat, that they have a whole lot of it's elderly.
Well, I think it's also included in the numbers, what I'm guessing, is that Aiden broke his arm and Mom had to stay home and take care of him for 6 weeks.
Yes, and that was a short term.
That's caregiving.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So that might be in there.
Yes.
But then after 6 weeks, it's not part of caregiving anymore.
No.
But another person breaks their arm.
Right. And it had temporary. I mean, temporary is one of the categories of caregiving.
Gotcha.
Okay. Well, this is a very broad topic in that it covers really almost all facets of life in some form or fashion. And you have, as you've mentioned, you have a lot of resources, an abundance of resources in which to help people. And what strikes me, at least, and I could be wrong about this, but people who are caregiving don't always have the time to find those resources.
Exactly.
And so what is your suggestion, assuming that somebody who is struggling with or going through caregiving is listening to this or knows somebody who might, where would you direct them?
At this point, the internet is amazing.
Okay.
If they can pare it down to a specific area of what they're looking at, they can look up that, and it'll tell them support groups that are out there. Yeah. There are hundreds of support groups in specific areas. The Alzheimer's Association, the Terminal Cancer Association. I mean, there's just all these different. So that's what But when I started looking at all this 15, 20 years ago, internet was not, it was there, but
it's not what it was. It is now.
It was not as easy to use. It was not as loaded with information as it is now because people had to formulate it and put it out there.
Yeah. Well, I am, I guess, amazed because there are always ways to help people. There's always ways to be of benefit to people. And Jesus, to go to some scripture for a little bit, I don't know that there's any scriptures directly related to caregiving.
No, but there's 26 about helping each other. And
that's kind of where I was going, right? And so Galatians 6:2 is one of my favorite verses. I've shared it on here many a time. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Well, it goes back to the idea that you cannot bear somebody's burdens if you don't know that they are carrying a burden. And thus there is communication that is required. You must talk about these things. You must share, hey, I'm struggling with something and I can't carry it on my own. I need help. Well, that opens doors. That helps people.
This is a major point that Griefshare makes, that people want to help. Mm-hmm. They know that you're grieving, as an example. Yeah. And what do we normally say? And you talked about this earlier today. Yeah. When somebody asks us, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. Do you need any help? No, I'm okay. Yeah. Well, that's not the right thing to say.
No, it's not.
So we try to teach people how to identify what things can I use help with. It could be cutting grass, mowing washing the car, whatever it might be, buying food for me, visiting with me, whatever it might be. Make a list of those things and have them available. When someone asks you, can I help you? What can I do? Yeah. And you can say, I'd really like you to do this if you don't mind. Yeah. And we call it a grief letter. We write a grief letter. Yeah. Here's how I'm handling the death of my wife. Yeah. I'm really, really in trouble now because of this and this and this, but I'm going to do this and this to get better, and I also need help in this way to do that. Same thing can be true with caregiving as well. Yeah,
I got to talk with somebody yesterday who had lost his wife a couple years ago and really been struggling for quite some time. And one of the things that he said to me was, I don't want to ask, and I've heard this from multiple people. I don't want to ask somebody because I feel like I'm just a burden to them. Yeah. And I said, okay. would you do something for them if they asked you?
Yes.
In a heartbeat. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, then is it a burden for them to help you?
Yes.
Do they love you? And the answer to that is, to a degree, yes, it's a burden. We're carrying a burden, but it's something that we willingly choose to do, and it's something we want to do.
Yeah.
And we all know the rewards of helping somebody else. And so
Yes.
when you deny that person the ability to help you, you're denying them also of receiving that reward.
Exactly.
We call that boomerang love. You throw it out,
Yeah, and it comes
help
back.
somebody, and it comes back
Yeah.
to you and helps you.
Yeah, and that was what I shared with him as well, was the idea, I said, well, when you don't ask for help, what are you doing for the person who wants to help you? Well, you're not giving them an opportunity to help you,
Right.
to show love,
Right.
to be a blessing.
Exactly.
And so there's so much nuance to all of this, and I think what we kind of want to close with is just this idea of if you need help, what should you do? You ask. You seek help. And it's okay to do so, and it's a good thing to do so, because there are resources and there are people and there are ways to get that help. And Jesus, the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated. And, we want to receive help. Well, we ought to be willing to give help too. I think we've gotten to a point in society where, Dave, how are you doing? I'm doing good. If I were to ask you, Dave, how are you doing? You say, I'm not doing good. I need help. Oh, okay. We don't know what to do.
That's right.
Because we never hear anything other than, I'm fine. I'm
Fine
good.
is the word. Yep.
And so I think we have to, as Christians, we are called to be transformed. We're called to be different. We're called to be set apart. Well, if the whole world says, I'm fine, then what ought we to say? Not that, right? We have to be honest with how we're feeling and honest with what's going on.
Absolutely.
And that is such, I think, a small and simple way to change the discourse of talking about Jesus and talking about love and talking about hope and faith. And all of these things is simply somebody asks you, how are you doing? Well, if you're not doing good, then don't say you're doing good. If you're not doing good, tell somebody you're not doing good. Be honest about that.
Don't lie about it.
Don't lie. That's
Don't
right.
lie about it.
I know.
Be honest. Oh, wow.
It's almost a novel concept, but it's so ingrained in us to not want to be a burden, to not want to cause problems for somebody else, because everybody's got their, well, okay. The way I like to look at this, it should be a cyclical pattern, right? In the way that we love our spouse, all right? So husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Okay, so I put my wife above my needs. Her needs above my needs. Okay, wife, be submissive to your husband. Okay, so she puts my needs, my desires above hers. Well, as you do that, you have this cyclical pattern where you both are treating each other with the love and respect, and you get to a point where you're working on the same page and working together, right?
Very good. Very good.
And as we talk about this in life, imagine if the church at Keller, 350 members on a Sunday morning, we're all there talking with one another and helping one another with their problems and their burdens. Do you know how easy it would be to not solve all of the problems, but to feel encouraged and to feel loved and to know that it's going to be okay, because the person sitting next to me and the person all the way across the auditorium knows what I'm going through and can help me with it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're called to do.
Absolutely.
Recently, and when one of our members' husband died and the family came, and then we had the family meal after the service, and one of her relatives came in and said, I didn't know people did this anymore. We said, we always do it.
Always. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I appreciate y'all coming on. I appreciate y'all talking about these two things. We didn't quite go 3 hours, Dave, but I'm sure
I'm not through yet.
But really do appreciate y'all coming on. Thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you, Dave.
Thank you for what you're doing, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chris. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you listening, I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation, maybe even half as much as we have. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything, if you're looking for information about Griefshare, if you're looking for information about caregiving, please send us an email and let us know. You'll hear the email address here in just a little bit. You can reach us on Facebook, but let us know, and we will be happy to get you in touch with those who know what they're talking about.
Absolutely will.
So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day. God bless you. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Bible Conversations. We want to ask if you have any questions, suggestions, or comments that you please email us at kcocbibleconversations@gmail.com.
You can also find us on social media. We've got a Facebook page as well as an Instagram account. Our Facebook page is very simple. It's just Bible Conversations. On Instagram, it's very simple, at Bible Conversations. Look us up, like our posts, and share it with your friends.
We also have an opportunity for you to help us financially through a store via Kim's Closet. And you can find that. You can just type into Google Kim's Closet. We have a link as well that we will be posting in each of our episodes, and we just hope that you'll reach out and find us and purchase a hoodie or a shirt with the logo on it, and that way you can spread the word without having to say a word. So we appreciate you. Thank you all. Have a blessed week.